Welcome to How Do They Afford That, the podcast that peeks into the financial lives of everyday Australians. I'm Michael Thompson. I'm a writer and co-host of the Fear and Greed business podcast. And as always, I'm with Canna Campbell, financial planner, founder of Sugar Mama TV, the financial literacy platform covering YouTube, podcasts, books, Instagram, pretty much everywhere. Canna, we are, halfway through manifesting March. Have you manifested yourself some
money?
Oh yeah, I'll start with money because this podcast is all about money. Have you had some money coming in the last couple of weeks?
I have to say, off the disaster of Frugal February, manifesting March is quite magnificent. I am in the flow. I am in the zone. I am a money magnet. I am attracting abundance and prosperity.
I don't mean
Kumbaya.
to kind of, this is very, very woo-woo, isn't it? I don't mean to kind of bring you down to earth too quickly, but anything after the February that you had would be an improvement because your Frugal February was rotten.
Rotten. I swore in my last podcast on Sugar Mama's Fireplay about how bad it was, and I nicknamed it something also with the same alliteration.
I saw that. That was very shocking.
And I have to say it actually got worse. Our freezer died shortly after Frugal February. But anyway, manifesting money is in the money. I'm in the zone. It's actually quite incredible. And I feel like Frugal February is being wrapped up and concluding. And what I'm actually manifesting is bigger than what happened in Frugal February.
I know in our Manifesting March, I was a bit of a skeptic in our Manifesting March episode, which is well worth a listen from a couple of weeks ago. But it still sounds to me like you're trying to convince yourself that this is better than February. It feels like you're trying to talk yourself into it.
I can't share with you my manifesting number, but it's big. I'm going big this month, biggest than I've ever achieved. And I am well and truly on my way.
I love the fact that you're actually setting yourself a hard target, that it's not just manifesting. And this goes to the goal setting that we've talked about in the past, that it's not just say, I would love to pay my mortgage off or something. It is actually be very specific and say, I want to manifest X amount this month, or I want to do this month. And it is very, very specific.
That's why it's Manifesting March.
See, I need to go back and listen to that episode because clearly I've forgotten everything because I feel like by the end of the episode, you'd kind of convinced me to at least dabble.
The dabbler versus the diehard, and I will share with you when we wrap up Manifesting March, and you'll be blown away by what I'm achieving.
Okay, all right. Well, we're not talking about manifesting today. We really got sidetracked very early today. We're talking about something quite serious, and it is about the environment that we're in at the moment. We've got interest rates rising. You've got house prices dropping, right? But they're still very, very high, higher than before the pandemic. At the same time, you've got a rental squeeze going on, really high rents, limited availability for properties. It's kind of almost feels like it's a bit of a perfect storm in housing at the moment. And every now and then you see this term pop up and you see it on kind of headline on news articles and things. And I wanted to get an idea of how it works because it might be a way for people to kind of get their foot on the property ladder or their foot in the door, or there's kind of limbs going everywhere here at the moment, feet in all kinds of places. Rent vesting is the term that I see pop up, rent vesting. And so I want to talk to you all about that. But before we get into that, we just need to make it abundantly clear that as you're listening today, anything that we talk about is general in nature. It is never personal or investment or strategic or product advice. It is purely for financial education purposes only.
That's right, Michael. Should you ever hear something we're talking about and you think, I'd like to do that for myself, can you please go and speak to a financial planner and ask them for personal advice based on your own financial situation, risk profile, dreams and goals, and deadlines for those dreams and goals.
Rent vesting is one of those words that, it's great for a headline, but it's kind of quite a serious idea behind it. Rent investing. What exactly is it?
All right. So rent investing is an investment strategy where you rent where you want to live, but you actually go and own an investment property or investment properties where you can afford financially. So, for example, you might rent in the city, so it's close to your work, but then you may own a residential property, say in a rural area where it might be a little bit more affordable and within your budget. And the idea is that you put the rent towards the mortgage with the intention of helping it pay itself off over time.
Okay, so it might be someone that's, say, renting an apartment in the heart of Melbourne or in the heart of Sydney, but they own a property in perhaps, say, Brisbane or Darwin, cities that have been more affordable.
More affordable. And it's a
Okay.
way of people actually being able to get their foot in the property market.
Mm-hmm.
And if they want to, build it up from there and also build some equity for themselves.
All right, so who's kind of doing this at the moment? It feels like if it's something that people used in order to get their foot on the property ladder or their foot in the door or whatever bits they want to put in different places, in hindsight, that's a terrible thing to say. It sounds very inappropriate, but we're going to roll with it. Who is doing it?
Look, mainly millennials and Gen Z.
Okay.
Okay, so anyone between their mid-20s to early 40s.
Okay. So it is very much aligned then with the time at which people would be looking to buy their first property.
Look, getting into the property market is expensive thanks to stamp duty, and people forget property is a long-term investment. So it makes sense that these generations are doing it because they've got the benefit of time to see all the peaks and troughs and all volatility that's naturally part of a high-growth asset such as property.
All right. I think the first thing that kind of stands out for me is that I get the point of it being too expensive to buy where you want to live, so you buy somewhere else. But how does it financially make sense if you are paying rent at the same time and you've got a mortgage repayment? Wouldn't it just be easier to potentially kind of relocate to a more affordable area and buy and live in the same property?
Not necessarily. It's not quite as simplistic and straightforward as that. There are a lot of millennials and Gen Zs who are incredibly motivated financially. They have huge aspirations and they really want to set themselves up for life and not be told when they should or can retire. So they're taking matters into their own hands, which is, I think, incredibly inspirational. But if you've got someone who's incredibly motivated to take control of their financial future, owning a property or even a portfolio of properties can be one of their financial goals and dreams if they want to build long-term growing passive income. And they may not be able to afford to buy in the area that they live in. So this is potentially the next best thing. And it gives them that freedom and that flexibility that comes from being a tenant where they can move apartments, they can move suburbs, and also, the benefits of the cash flow. If something breaks, they're not responsible for it. It can be just call their property manager or their landlord and that gets fixed. But in the meantime, they're using their surplus cash flow to build long-term growing passive income streams through a property portfolio where the rent is paying the interest cost or paying the mortgage repayment and helping pay it off over time. So they're actually getting, I guess, the best of both worlds. They're investing, establishing themselves financially, but then they're also leaving themselves in a situation where they've got complete freedom to pick and choose where they want to live. If they want to live close to the city, whether they want to live close to the beach. It works for a lot of people.
I've seen it kind of go both ways where people have made those decisions. And I'm thinking of kind of two couples that I know in particular. And one couple had their heart set on a particular suburb, and it's a very pricey suburb in one of our capital cities. And they basically said it's that suburb or nothing. And so they just waited and waited and waited, and then they had a baby. And so the plans to buy a property have been pushed further down the track. And at the moment, so they still don't actually have anything because they've still got their heart set on this ideal suburb. And I think they're now actually starting to realize that, hang on, this might never actually happen, because while prices are correcting now, they are still a long way above kind of where they have been historically.
They're coming off, from their highs, which is still significantly higher. And a lot of people think, a property crash is now cheap and a bargain. No, they've just come back from that ridiculous
the extreme
run.
highs, but they are still high. Then on the other hand, I've got another couple that I know that they were in Sydney and they couldn't afford to buy a property in Sydney during the boom. And so they looked to Brisbane and bought essentially a family home in Brisbane that they will likely never live in, but have had tenants in there from day one. And so I think that's actually a really kind of practical example of what
smart
is kind of rent vesting. And so I can see how it does play out. There's a lot of kind of strategy behind it though, isn't there, in terms of positive gearing, negative gearing, etc. So it might just help to get a little bit of a lesson in
course.
various gearings. Did I say that right?
I don't think so, but I know what you're talking about. So I'm just going to pretend you are making sense and I'm going to run with it.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Property is, as I said, is a long-term investment and it's expensive to get into. So you want to do it right and want to make sure that you understand exactly what you're getting yourself into. Now, positive gearing is when the rent that you receive exceeds the interest repayment.
Yep.
So say, for example, I buy an investment property, my rent is $2,000 per month, and my mortgage repayment is, say, $1,500 per month.
Right.
I'm technically making a $500 per month profit. That is what we call cash flow positive. It means the rent is exceeding the mortgage repayment. And what sometimes people do is they use that excess rent to help pay down the loan over time, help maximize the equity, and then they can potentially use that to then secure another investment property should they wish.
And that's taxable, isn't it?
It most definitely is taxable. Even though you're using it to pay down the actual debt, it still has to be assessed and counts as income. So therefore it is taxed.
So that's positively geared.
Positively geared, that's correct.
Negatively geared.
Negatively geared means that the rent is actually less than the interest repayment.
Yep.
So say, for example, that investment property is paying me $2,000 a month, but interest rates have gone up. Surprise, surprise. So now my interest repayment per month is now $2,300.
Is it just on the interest repayment or is it on the total repayment for the loan? So the principal plus interest?
It's the interest.
Okay.
So it doesn't matter what the actual loan is. It's the rent versus the interest cost because that's the cost to hold the property.
Okay.
Obviously, the more you pay off the home loan, though, the cost of that interest comes down and you can, by making extra payments, you can reduce that principal loan. So therefore, the interest comes down and you can actually make a property, turn it from being cash flow negative to cash flow positive. And that's what long-term growing passive income stream strategies are often about.
Yeah. And so we often hear about negatively geared properties because it seems to be quite a political issue as well in terms of there have been moves in the past to potentially limit access to that because there are tax benefits or there can be tax benefits to negatively gearing a property.
Correct. So generally speaking, the cost of the interest, if you're out of pocket, like that $300 per month, you can claim that off your tax. So there are sometimes great incentives. And if you go to the bookstore and you look at those property books that are often called 0 to 30 properties in 5.5 years, they are quite often built upon the foundational principles of negative gearing. Now, negative gearing I've seen goes spectacularly wrong for people, but I've also seen it work for people. Now, you've got to be very, very careful with the way you structure negative gearing, particularly in an environment where property prices are coming down and interest rates are going up, because what happens if you can't keep dipping into your pocket? What happens in this example that I just gave you where I'm $300 short per month? What if I don't have that $300? Or what if the interest rates go up even more and now it's $500 per month? This is where it can really come unstuck. And if the property market is falling, I may be forced to sell that property for less than what I actually bought it for. So you really want to run your numbers, get good quality advice as to how to structure it, and really look at the cash flow dynamics and what your goals are behind it. And lots of times when I've seen this work for people is they've started with a cash flow negative property, but what they've done is out of their own surplus cash flow, by sticking to a budget, they make extra payments towards that loan for the first couple of years and get it to a stage where it's actually cash flow positive. And then they will start saving up their next deposit to buy a second investment property. And that's how people have been able to build these incredible property portfolios where they've been cash flow positive and they've got really safe buffers. And I always say to people, don't just factor in 3 interest rate rises, factor in a 3% interest rate rise so that you know you are pretty bulletproof to the best of your ability when it comes to managing risks.
Okay, I want to talk to you more about that growth of a property empire because it's something that I think a lot of people would...
Your face is lighting up.
Well, it's what a lot of people would aspire to, and I'm an absolute sucker for any kind of news article that has those kind of 0 to 30 properties by the age of 30. I'm obviously past the age of 30, so I've missed that goal. But I can still aspire to have 30 properties, I suppose. We will come back in a second and I'm going to get basically everything I need to know about this from you. So, Canna, we're talking about rent vesting today, so rent investing. And just before the break, you mentioned the strategies behind people using this basically to help build a property portfolio. I think I use the term property empire. You use
I like the way you think. That's an abundant manifesting mindset.
I have manifested an empire. That's right. And so how does that work? It seems like such a leap to go from kind of buying one property, potentially not necessarily in the city that you're living in or the town that you're living in because you can't afford where you are, but buying somewhere else. How then do you kind of go from that to then potentially owning multiple properties? Is it important that they are all, in this example, positively geared so that they are covering the cost of the mortgage themselves so that you don't end up with this kind of snowball effect of having to kind of cover, say, a $200 shortfall on the repayments every week, and that just multiplies across 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 properties?
Look, there are many different ways of doing it, and it's going to suit different people with different objectives and timeframes and aspirations. So there isn't really one set rule to follow, but it starts with just one property.
Mm-hmm.
Just like that saying, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So they'll start with what is affordable. What is not especially being your first property, you don't want to throw yourself into the deep end with a massive, great, whopping big loan that you can barely keep your head above water, and it doesn't allow, the flexibility and the lifestyle freedom that whilst you're renting somewhere else. So it starts with doing it very conservatively in a safe zone, knowing your numbers, knowing your buffers, and making sure that you're making those extra payments to create that property that's then cash flow positive. Over time, people start saving. They obviously might tap into the equity of that property if it's gone up in value, and they move on to their second property. And it does compound. It gets faster and faster. But obviously, a lot of people don't realize this. Depending on what you're buying and the value of those assets, and whether you're buying apartments or whether you're buying houses, you've got to really take into consideration the running costs. So strata, property manager, if you've got one of those, the water rates, insurances, all those sorts of things.
And maintenance costs can add up very, very quickly. You only need to look at your February.
My frugal February, but also special strata levies. I have an investment property, and I remember I once got with very short notice, because it was a urgent bill, $21,000 or $2,000.
Oh.
And it was to fix the roof, which was urgent. Oh. And everyone got hit with this. And it was out of the blue, and there you go. And people sort of focus on the growth of the property, but they don't understand, or they don't realize the holding cost of property. And there's another little nasty one in there. And I shouldn't say nasty because that's not very nice, but there's land tax. I'll never forget having a conversation with a friend that has done this strategy. They've bought houses. They've bought them, they've lived in them, they've moved out, and they've repeated this process. And they're all now investment properties, and they have been for quite some time. And I mentioned something about land tax, and she said, "What are you talking about? What's that?" I said, "Well, you've got a few properties. You'd probably be up for land tax, and they're in some really nice areas." And she had no idea what I was talking about. So I said, "Please go talk to your accountant." And she got a whopping great big tax bill.
Oh.
Huge, because she had for so many years not properly registered for land tax.
Oh, ouch.
Now, again, people don't know about this. And I don't know how it slipped, but I was having a glass of wine with this person. And it was, and she called me and said, "You wouldn't believe it. Like, you're right. My accountant didn't tell me about this. I wasn't properly registered, and I have years upon years of land tax."
Oh my God. And I suppose that's the best kind of case being made for getting good advice as well, and making sure that you've got the right people advising you when you are seeking professional advice. Because that's a shocker. And that kind of thing, it goes back to the resilience episode that we're talking about. Look at us just kind of freely peppering in kind of references to old episodes. But that's the kind of thing that would really hit you hard. If you copped a bill like that, how on earth do you kind of handle it?
Well, it was upsetting for her because she was ready to go on another big investment, and it basically wiped out all that money. Yeah. So frustrating for her. But this is, why you get advice, but more importantly, why you go and get proactive advice. Don't get the knee-jerk reaction, "Oh my gosh, what do? I now need to go see a financial planner or an accountant."
Yep.
This is why you need to have a good quality financial planner or accountant that works with you on an ongoing basis, that knows your stuff and knows, oh, we haven't done this, we need to register for you that, or that concession may be available for you, or we can apply for this, or we can get a private ruling on that. They will work with you in a proactive manner. And when you find a good financial planner or accountant or mortgage broker, they are worth their weight in gold.
One thing that you mentioned earlier on, and I should have asked you at the time, but I'm curious about some of the motivations for people using strategies like this, that we talked about people not necessarily being able to buy close to their work, for instance, but still wanting to get into the property ladder. Is part of it about FOMO as well, that they see, and have you ever seen kind of people rushing to get into the market because of the huge rate of growth in recent years, and they're using strategies like rent investing and buying somewhere where they can afford, but it's just because they go, oh, I've got to get in now, otherwise I'm going to miss out altogether, only to then be hit by a correction in these in property prices, which we have seen in the last kind of 12 or so months. What do you do then? Oh, that's a very long-winded question. It's a grim picture as well that I'm painting here. It's not manifesting positivity at all, but what do they do in that dire situation?
Look, it doesn't have to be dire, but just going back to the first question I believe you asked me is FOMO. I don't think it's necessary. Look, there is the herd mentality. There's no doubt about it. And property is a very simple investment to understand. Most people can understand the concept of buying a property, renting it out, receiving monthly rent, and a mortgage. Whereas a lot of people struggle to get their head around, say, a share portfolio, because it's not a tangible asset like a property is. You can't stand on the lawn and admire your shares in bank XYZ like you can stand on the lawn of an investment property. So I think there's an element of it being a very easy investment to understand, the herd mentality, the media, and obviously all the headlines about property and the billions of dollars and, you know, all these sort of get-rich-quick schemes that are often
property
funded by
empire
property
articles
developers.
that I click on. Yep.
But then there's also the FIRE movement.
Oh, yeah.
Financial independence, retire early. And again, coming back to these millennials and Gen Zs that are very motivated, very inspired, do not want to be dictated as to how and when they can retire at age 65, 70. They want to take matters into their own hands. They want to build that long-term growing passive income. They want to build that empire. That, yeah, to quote you.
But what happens when the market corrects?
Okay, well, now I'm coming to this.
Sorry. I'm trying to skip right.
So this is where my point about doing the numbers and factoring in a 3% interest rate rise, whether you can still sustain that property, whether you can still meet those repayments. And this is where we're 12 months into these interest rate rises. I think we've had 9 interest rate rises, and we haven't yet seen, I think, the pain yet. I think we're really just starting to see I think it's 800,000 households which are still technically on their fixed rates, which are just about to come off. So I think we're going to start to really see things get messy in the next couple of months, and it will probably throughout the year get potentially worse and worse. But this is where we see people, I believe, and this is strictly my opinion, not advice, of course, but we'll see people start to have to sell properties. If they own, say, 4 or 5 properties, they might realize, you know what, I'm going to have to sell one of these properties to release some equity to help pay down some of these other loans because I simply can't cope. But we've also got the double whammy of it being quite a strong rental market as well. So there's lots of different dynamics. And this is also a big point to make people aware of, is diversification is incredibly important. Not buying 5 houses in the same street, considering different suburbs, different states perhaps even, really having a diversified investment portfolio, because as we all know, not every single house or property is the same, and they appeal
considering
to
commercial and all the other things.
Exactly.
Is there a misconception about property that, I mean, you go into shares, right? And you go into it knowing that this can go up and down, but there's this kind of notion with property that it's just going to keep on going and rising, but it is still an investment and it still comes with risk.
There is a huge misconception, and I think it's been put into us by the baby boomer generation. So I don't want to point finger, but they bricks and mortar and a lot of, I guess, different backgrounds from talking to people about this. You know, I talk to my friends and I talk to clients and colleagues, and they're like, oh, my parents came here with nothing and they just property, bricks and mortar is the way to go. Can never lose money. And that mentality has really been programmed. And that may have been correct and reasonable back then, but this is a different economy now, and there are different opportunities, and there are more ways of making money. And we have obviously different policies and procedures to help create more security and stability in our economy as well. So there is a huge misconception, and like people not realizing about land tax. People look at those charts and graphs and they're a little bit misleading because there is no real barometer of what a property is worth. The only time you really know the value of your property is when you buy it and when you sell it.
Yeah.
And yes, it might be worth more, but if someone's only willing to pay a certain amount,
you can
the market dictates that.
Yeah, you will only get what someone is willing to pay.
And I can tell myself, my investment property is worth X, Y, Z. Unless I've got someone who's willing to pay for it, that's just a number I've created in my head, to be honest. It's ignorant.
There's so much to discuss in this. And there's one thing that you mentioned before in terms of mortgage stress and the pressure that people are going to be under in coming months as the rising rates kind of really start to hit home. So I think it's worth coming back to in another episode. And we might look at something about even kind of refinancing and some of those options and some of the traps as well to be wary of there.
I would love that because this is something that's really relevant right now. And I really want to make sure that I arm everyone with the right type of information so that they make smart, intelligent decisions that always honour their financial well-being.
One last one on rent investing before we go. Is it a long-term strategy? Like, is this kind of for retirement or is it a stepping stone?
Property is a long-term investment.
Yeah.
There is no doubt about it. When I say long-term, I'm talking 10 years or more. But obviously there are people that go into property as a business, such as flipping property. They are in it for the short-term gain, to go in, renovate, and put it back on the market looking shiny, new, and get an inflated price. And that's more of a business rather than a long-term investment strategy. But look, stamp duty is an absolute killer. So you need to consider and factor in the cost of entering the property market. So generally speaking, yes, it is a long-term investment, but the banks love to loan against property. They love the security and I guess stability of property, and they're more likely to lend you money for other further opportunities, whether it be buying your own principal place of residence or buying more property. They're a lot more lenient. Whereas when I go to the bank and say, well, I own XYZ amount of shares in your bank, they couldn't give two hoots and don't really care about that as security. So
isn't that fascinating?
This is getting very opinionated of me. So I'm stepping out of...
Cut loose.
Yeah. Some people will find this very confronting and won't like it, but there is, I believe, a disjoint in our system. The bank won't care that I might own a percentage of the institution.
Yeah.
But they won't lend me money to accumulate more in that bank. But then they're willing to let me gear up to my eyeballs on property and put myself potentially under stress. That's my 2 cents. That I'm sitting on the edge of my seat and I'm actually trying to remain quite reserved.
I thought there was a chance you were going to flip the table just then. I was very hopeful that we would actually just see this kind of incredible kind of Hulk kind of come out and just start destroying the place.
It can come out as not pretty.
Well, maybe that's a good teaser. I will keep prodding in future episodes and see whether we can get the Hulk to come out. All right, we've covered a lot today, and we're pretty much out of time. So really, the main thing to remember here is that the property is long term and it is an investment that it can go well. It can.
I wanted to just cut it right over you. There are holding costs, and there are expensive holding costs that do eat into your bottom line, such as strata, water, property management, special strata levies, all those little things that do actually eat into your numbers. So you really need to do your research, think about diversification, and run your numbers so you've got a safe buffer in place.
Yeah, and that if you are looking at rent investing or rent vesting, if you're writing a headline, it's this strategy where you potentially rent where you want to live, buy somewhere where you can potentially afford. But the main thing is just make sure you're getting good professional advice on it, that obviously it is something that is popular with people trying to get into the market, but it's also useful for potentially helping to build a property portfolio or a property empire, depending on whether you are me or not, that there are a lot of these kind of tax implications and things that you need to take into account, particularly when you're looking at gearing, whether it is negative or positive gearing, and we've had a very good lesson in
And
that
I
one
hope
today.
you're feeling positive about understanding what gearing is.
I feel like I have manifested some good knowledge today. And really that it's not just about lifestyle. It is about trying to take a fairly proactive approach to building wealth over quite a long period of time rather than just kind of preserving the lifestyle that you have at the moment. There was a lot there. How do we find you if we want more information?
So every Monday morning, I publish a podcast in more detail of these topics called Sugar Mama's Fire Play. But if you want to connect with me and ask me a question, obviously I can't give you advice, but the fastest place to find me is on Instagram at Sugar Mama TV.
Yeah, and you can hear me every day with Sean Aylmer on Fear and Greed, which is Australia's most popular business news podcast. And you know what? I'm going to mention this. You can find my novel, How to Be Remembered, wherever you buy books as well. It's nothing to do with kind of saving money or anything. In fact, it will involve spending a small amount of money, but I think it's a good investment. Thank you for listening to How Do They Afford That? Remember to hit follow on the podcast and please leave us a review as well. We really appreciate those reviews. Next week, we are talking about whether it is ever too late to get interested and get active in managing your money. It is a really interesting topic because it's one that applies to every age because it's something that you can be doing at all stages of life.
And I'm going to get aggressive. I'm going to flip the table.
You better. All right, don't miss it.